Imagine you are a legacy American car company, and you suddenly realize the most profitable thing you can build isn't actually a pickup truck. It's the massive grid-scale battery powering the artificial intelligence that designs the truck.
Right.
Welcome to NovaStream, everyone. Hello to all of you tuning in right now. If you're looking at the screens around us, you know this is your 24/7 streaming home for live markets.
Yeah, we've got a lot moving today.
We really do. Over here, we have the live crypto spark lines tracking major volatility in BTC, ETH, and SOL. And below that, the global financial indices are flashing constant updates on the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, Forex pairs, and commodities.
And don't forget the breaking news feed on the right, pulling auto-curated headlines the second they drop.
Yeah, it's just a complete fire hose of raw data today. So our mission right now is to cut through all that noise and bring you the highlights of the day.
Well, looking at the source stack driving all this data today, a single, incredibly cohesive theme emerges.
Which is,
The market is undergoing massive structural pivots. The established rules of gravity in finance and tech are, they're being suspended and rewritten.
yeah.
We're seeing software giants prove they can actually monetize AI. Legacy corporations are just tearing up their decades-old business models. And all of this is against a backdrop of intensely polarized political shockwaves dictating global commodities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we look at the tech headlines hitting the NASDAQ ticker right now, a completely new narrative is taking shape.
It really is.
For the past year or so, the overwhelming fear on Wall Street was that AI was going to just, eat the enterprise software industry alive.
Right. The anxiety was that if an AI can code and automate tasks, enterprise software companies would just hemorrhage human users.
Yeah, but today's numbers show that fear was, entirely misplaced.
Yeah, the market is waking up to the actual mechanics of AI implementation. We're moving out of that theoretical hype cycle.
It could.
I know, right? We're into proven structural business models now. The companies succeeding are the ones changing how they charge you, the customer.
Figma is a perfect example of this. Their stock is soaring today after a massive earnings beat. And it's entirely driven by a new monetization structure for their AI design tools. But the real heavy hitter on the board today is ServiceNow, trading under the ticker NOW.
Oh, massive day for them.
Best day in a year. They're surging back near $103, which pushes their market cap to $106 billion.
Wow.
Bank of America just slapped a buy rating on them with a $130 target. And what's driving this isn't some fancy new software. It's a fundamental shift in their pricing mechanics.
To understand why the market is rewarding ServiceNow so heavily, you have to look at the flaw in the traditional software as a service model.
The per-seat pricing.
Spot on. Historically, companies like ServiceNow charged by the seat, meaning you buy a license for each individual human employee. So the panic last year was simple math. If an AI agent can do the work of 10 employees, a company fires 9 people, and ServiceNow loses 9 seats of revenue.
But they pivoted.
They pivoted to a hybrid consumption model. They are effectively saying, hey, we don't care if a human or an autonomous AI agent is using the platform. You're going to pay for the underlying computing value and the compliance guardrails we provide.
They decoupled from human headcount.
Yeah, they figured out how to charge the robots.
And that's flashing a massive green light for the whole software sector.
Yeah.
You can see it rallying in funds like the IGV ETF right now.
Yeah, lifting the whole basket.
And at the exact same time, the dark cloud of litigation hanging over the AI space just, evaporated. Elon Musk lost his lawsuit against OpenAI and Sam Altman.
That was fast.
A 9-person jury took less than 2 hours to find OpenAI not liable on all claims. They essentially ruled town. Musk waited way too long to file his 2024 suit.
Though he plans to appeal, right?
Yeah, his team is planning to appeal, but for now, the enterprise application of AI is moving forward without that legal drag.
It creates a really fascinating juxtaposition. The courtroom drama regarding who controls the soul of AI is wrapping up, while the enterprise reality of how AI actually makes money is just accelerating.
I see the logic of the software rally, but I'm going to challenge this narrative for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If enterprise software companies are suddenly the big winners because they figured out a consumption model, they still rely entirely on hardware infrastructure to run those models.
Right, the hardware.
I'm looking straight at NVIDIA. It's like software companies are the miners who finally figured out how to sell the gold. But NVIDIA is the pickaxe seller. If the software engines are revving up, What happens when NVIDIA can't supply enough parts to build the cars?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Wall Street is beginning to harbor that very same suspicion.
Are they really?
Yeah, the institutional focus has shifted entirely away from NVIDIA's top-line revenue beats. Analysts, specifically over at Morgan Stanley, are zeroing in on a massive physical bottleneck, which is the memory crunch.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that memory crunch. What are we actually talking about here for the folks watching?
Think of NVIDIA's graphical processing units, the GPUs, like a massive 100-lane superhighway.
Okay.
They can process an unfathomable amount of data simultaneously. But the on-ramp to that highway, the high-bandwidth memory chips that feed data into the processor, is currently only 1 lane wide.
A huge bottleneck.
Right. Global supply for that specific high-bandwidth memory is incredibly tight, and the physical cost of those components is surging. So the debate isn't whether NVIDIA can design a fast chip anymore. It's whether component shortages will severely compress their gross margins.
And that leads directly to the question of long-term return on investment, right? Because hyperscalers, the massive cloud providers running the internet backbone, like Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, they are spending billions on this infrastructure today.
Billions upon billions.
But NVIDIA has to prove they can transition these clients to their newer, more complex architectures, platforms like Blackwell and Vera Rubin, before the hyperscaler capital expenditure cycle cools off.
Precisely. And this is why capital gets impatient. Tracking the ROI for a multi-billion-dollar AI data center takes years. When capital is constrained by physical hardware bottlenecks but still demands immediate returns, it tends to seek out high-frequency environments.
Which completely explains the massive volume spikes we're seeing right now in the live crypto markets feed.
Yeah, the timeline for returns is compressing.
Look at Gemini Space Station, ticker GEMI. The stock rallied aggressively today after Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss announced a $100 million strategic investment into the platform.
A huge injection.
And the underlying mechanism of that investment is super telling. It was funded entirely in Bitcoin at $14 per share.
Wow.
But what's really driving Gemini's 42% year-over-year revenue growth for the first quarter isn't just people buying and holding crypto. It's their new derivatives and prediction markets.
Because the psychology of the modern retail participant has fundamentally shifted. I mean, we just passed the 8th anniversary of the 2018 Supreme Court ruling striking down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act.
Right. The ruling that effectively allowed any state to legalize and tax sports betting. And the numbers on what followed are just staggering.
What are we looking at?
In 8 years, we have seen $668,603,360,342 legally wagered on sports.
That is an unbelievable amount of capital.
It's generated over $12 billion in state tax revenue, even with massive states like California still blocking it. And now, platforms like Kalshi and Robinhood are merging into this exact same space with event contracts.
Yeah, it's the gamification of risk. The traditional silos of finance are dissolving in real time. The lines separating a retail stock investor, a crypto derivatives trader, and someone placing a sports bet, they're virtually gone.
Totally blurred.
When Robinhood or Gemini offers an event contract, they're taking the core mechanic of sports betting, predicting a binary yes or no outcome, and applying it to cultural or financial events.
Right.
You're no longer asked to invest in a company's 10-year strategic vision. You're trading on the statistical probability of a single data point happening by tomorrow afternoon.
So let me ask you this then. For the listener watching this volume explode, are we reaching a point where placing a parlay on a football game is mechanically no different than buying an exotic crypto derivative? Has the whole world just become one giant speculation dashboard for you?
Structurally, yeah. Yes, it has. Financial platforms realize modern users want high-frequency, event-driven engagement. Risk appetite has completely mainstreamed.
The speed of that speculation is dizzying. But while retail capital is chasing binary event contracts, the legacy titans over on the S&P 500 are making radical moves in the physical world.
Oh, absolutely.
Because capitalizing on that AI infrastructure boom we talked about requires immense physical resources. Which brings us to Ford. Ford is officially becoming an energy business.
Yeah, it's huge.
Led by veteran executive Lisa Drake, they launched Ford Energy to manufacture grid-scale battery energy storage systems. They're taking repurposed plants in Kentucky and converting them into utility-scale battery factories.
Mm.
They already inked a deal with France's EDF to supply up to 20 gigawatt-hours to North America by
A
2027.
massive undertaking.
And they aren't the only ones. Berkshire Hathaway's new CEO, Greg Abel, is actively reversing Warren Buffett's strategies. He bought $2.8 billion of Delta, which Buffett dumped in 2020. He tripled Alphabet, slashed Amazon and Visa, and bought Macy's.
Just tearing up the old playbook.
Then you have Lululemon, down 63% in 12 months in a vicious public fight with its founder, Chip Wilson, claiming his vision is frozen in time.
Right.
Even historical norms are breaking. The incoming Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, will be sworn in at the White House on Friday, which hasn't happened since Alan Greenspan in 1987.
Yeah, symbolic shifts everywhere.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Going out to Berkshire, watching Greg Abel trade is like watching someone take the keys to Dad's classic car and immediately put aftermarket rims on it.
That's a great way to put it.
But explain the Ford pivot to me, because frankly, considering their EV consumer struggles, this looks like a desperate pivot from a legacy automaker losing market share, not some genius master plan.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes perfect sense. Let's connect this right back to NVIDIA and the hyperscalers from Section 1.
Okay, lay it out.
Building AI data centers demands a colossal, almost incomprehensible amount of continuous electricity. The current American power grid simply cannot handle the load. Grid modernization is no longer an optional civic project. It's the critical bottleneck for the entire tech sector.
So Ford sees an opening.
Exactly. Ford realizes they have idle manufacturing capacity in Kentucky, they have chemical battery expertise from their EV research, and they are staring at an infinitely scalable market. They aren't pivoting to batteries because cars failed. They are capitalizing on the AI infrastructure boom.
Okay, viewing the automaker as the physical power plant for the software industry, that totally reframes it.
Right, but there's a catch.
What's that?
Building this new infrastructure relies entirely on global stability. You can't manufacture utility-scale batteries if the foundational commodities market is in chaos.
Which perfectly transitions us to the commodities index flashing red right now and the political news auto-populating on our stream. Now, before we jump into this, I need to make something explicitly clear to everyone watching.
Good call.
Our breaking news feed has pulled in some heavily political and polarized stories today. I want to emphasize to you, the listener, that NovaStream takes absolutely no sides. We do not endorse any left-wing or right-wing viewpoints. We are strictly here to impartially report the factual ideas contained in the original source material.
Yeah, we're just analyzing the mechanics.
Okay. With that said, looking at the commodities, tension is severe. Oil futures are climbing.
Yeah, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed to reliable shipping right now.
And global supply buffers are completely gone. President Trump has publicly warned that the, quote, clock is ticking on Iran. Stephen Innes is warning that losing those supply buffers could trigger the next big price spike.
It's a very precarious situation for global energy.
And this foreign policy tension has direct domestic casualties. Representative Thomas Massie is facing a brutal Kentucky primary against Ed Galbraith.
Right.
Because Massie voted to end the Iran war and pushed the war powers resolution, Trump endorsed his opponent. Massie is also dealing with an unsubstantiated hush money scandal days before the election. So what does this all mean? How does a geopolitical conflict in Iran directly domino into a local Kentucky primary?
Well, this raises an important question about how political movements define loyalty. For Representative Massie, his anti-interventionist stance on war powers isolated him. The America First movement often demands alignment on major foreign policy directives. So when Massie voted against the executive branch regarding Iran, foreign policy essentially became a domestic purity test. It proves you can't separate a global commodities crisis in the Strait of Hormuz from a local primary ballot in Kentucky.
Yeah.
The ideological lines are totally intertwined.
Wow. And the domestic legal news on the feed is equally intense. The DOJ just confirmed a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund.
This is a huge story.
It's part of the settlement ending Trump's $10 billion IRS tax leak lawsuit. And potential payouts could go to allies like Peter Navarro, Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, Mike Flynn, who's already getting $1.2 million, John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, Mark Meadows, and even Jan 6 convicts. The DOJ is citing the Obama-era Keep Siegel case, which was a $760 million settlement, as precedent.
Right, the USDA discrimination case.
Yeah, but critics are fiercely opposing this. The NYU Tax Law Center calls it a breathtaking abuse. Public Citizen calls it a slush fund. House Democrats filed a motion to block it, and Senator Ron Wyden called it brazen theft.
Can you give us some clarity on the legal mechanics comparing the Keep-Siegel precedent to this new, highly controversial IRS fund?
I can. So, impartially breaking down the mechanics here, the DOJ is leaning on historical precedent. In Keep-Siegel, the government created a broad fund to redress claims that the USDA systematically discriminated against Native American farmers.
Okay, so a systemic redress fund. Right. The DOJ's argument is that the government has established precedent to create these broad financial redress funds when federal agencies systematically wrong a group. They argue that settling the IRS tax leak lawsuit by creating a pool for those who face what they define as weaponized lawfare fits that framework.
But the critics argue that's a massive leap, right?
Yeah, the critics' argument hinges on constitutional standing and the connection between the original harm and the beneficiaries.
Because the lawsuit was just about a specific IRS tax leak.
Precisely. Critics argue there is zero legal nexus between an IRS privacy violation and, say, a January 6th conviction. Therefore, they argue this specific fund lacks constitutional standing and just bypasses the legislative branch's exclusive power of the purse to benefit political allies.
Got it. So it's executive settlement authority clashing with legislative spending power.
That is the core legal tension, yes.
Incredible.
And, as we look at today's board, I just want to leave the listener with a final thought to mull over.
Please do.
Look at everything we covered. A car company is now an energy grid supplier. AI software requires so much power, it's reshaping hardware constraints. Foreign oil rights are dictating local congressional races.
Everything touches everything.
The silos are gone. If you're watching NovaStream just for crypto or just for politics, you're missing the true story. Everything is a single, interconnected, global dashboard now. So my question for you is, where do you think the next hidden connection will pop up?
That is the perfect question to leave off on. Thank you so much for joining us for this analysis. And everyone watching, thank you for tuning in to NovaStream.
Always a pleasure.
Just a reminder to you all, the live charts, the spark lines, and the breaking news feeds keep running 24/7 right here on the channel. Keep your eyes on the data, and we will see you back here for the next highlights of the day. Goodbye, everyone.